The last few weeks, we've been looking at why did Jesus eat with sinners? Because there are several places in the scriptures, several stories of Jesus eating in the homes of Pharisees and tax collectors, and that came with great criticism from the establishment of the Jewish people at the time. They always thought that people like tax collectors and sinners, as they classed them, were unworthy of having the attention of respectable Jewish people. Well, of course, Jesus took a different account of that, and he made a great effort to eat meals with these type of people. And we heard very much over those weeks that when Jesus went into the home of these sinners with his friends and his disciples, there's a suggestion that the basis of this table fellowship was messianic forgiveness. And the meal itself was an anticipation of the messianic banquet. So there's great purpose in Jesus wanting to go into these places, mainly, I suspect, because it was a good place to talk and teach about the truth of God's love to people who were normally neglected by the priesthood of the Jewish people, because they wouldn't want to be contaminated by people who they believed weren't living by the law of Moses. So this week I thought we'd take it a stage further, in the sense that Jesus also ate in the houses of Christians, of people who believed in him and wanted to follow him. And so I thought we'll look at this lovely story in Luke chapter 10, that it's the time when Jesus went to the house of Mary and Martha, who were great friends of his, and at a meal. And there was a bit of a problem when Martha got mad at the master, Jesus, because Mary, her sister, was listening to Jesus sitting at his feet while she was preparing dinner or food, and she interrupted. Let's watch a video about what happened.
As Jesus and his disciples were on their way, he came to a village where a woman named Martha opened her home to him. She had a sister called Mary, who sat at the Lord's feet listening to what he said. But Martha was distracted by all the preparations that had to be made. She came to him and asked, "Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me to do the work by myself? Tell her to help me." "Martha, Martha," the Lord answered, "you are worried and upset about many things, but few things are needed, or indeed only one. Mary has chosen what is better, and it will not be taken away from her."
A lovely little story, this, I think. Just a few verses. But here is Jesus in their home, and Jesus is talking, I think, to more than just Martha, Mary, that video shows. I think there were many other people in the house as well. He was talking, and Martha is busy getting on with the preparations for food, and her sister is not helping, and so she gets really upset and speaks up and says to Jesus, "Tell Martha to help me." And of course, Jesus doesn't respond in that particular way. So we're going to have a look at this lovely little story, because I think there's a lot that we can learn from this. I mean, let's go to back to some of what we know about Martha and Mary. These two women appear frequently in the Gospels as friends of Jesus. We reckon that Martha was definitely the older of the two sisters because she's referred to as the hostess. So it's probably her home that they were meeting in Bethany. And Bethany is a little village not far from Jerusalem. And we know that also Lazarus is often around when they are around. Lazarus, who Jesus raised from the dead, was the sister of Martha, was the brother of Martha and Mary. And he's not in this story, but I'm sure he would have been around at this time. And, this was a home that Jesus felt welcoming, and I'm pretty sure visited quite often when he was in and around Jerusalem. Now, why would that be? Well, if we look at it, the Jewish people, the faithful ones, wanted to visit the temple for the various feasts. And of course, if like Jesus and his family lived in Nazareth, which was quite a distance away, even when he was a child, they would have traveled to Jerusalem several times. And where would they have stayed? Well, they would have stayed quite near there in the homes of other people. So I'm like bed and breakfast. And I'd imagine a family like Jesus's family perhaps have known Martha and Mary's home and their family for many years and often stayed over with them when they wanted to go out to Jerusalem because it was only 2 miles from the city walls of Jerusalem. And in fact, I've walked when I visited the Holy Land 20 odd years ago from the house that's supposed to be Mary and Martha's and Lazarus' house down to Jerusalem. It's just about an hour's walk. So in those days, of course, that would have been nothing for them. So Jesus knew this family. They could even be distant relations. And we've got this little incident here. And it really gives us representations of two parts of our human character and of the human characters in this family. We've got Mary, who seems to flow with the Spirit, absorbed with Jesus and loved his visits and was keen to spend time with him, sitting at his feet. Whereas her sister, although she loved Jesus equally as well, always wanted to make sure there was food around for him and, of course, his many other friends. So we got Mary, who's preoccupied when Jesus comes around, and Martha keeps on getting upset because it's her house. She has to manage it. Now, I like to give us examples from the world of art. I thought this was an interesting painting. This is the story of Martha and Mary painted by Caravaggio in about 1598. He's one of the well-known paintings of the Renaissance, and we know when he painted this, he was under the patronage of one of the cardinals in Rome itself. And I dare say the cardinal asked him to paint this painting for him, because that's how artists earn money with patrons at the moment. So, what's this all about? Well, I think it's got quite an interesting story about it, because we are told the background of the story from the historical documents that Caravaggio is painting the fact that Martha is trying to convert Mary from her life of pleasure to a life of virtue in Christ. In other words, she wasn't living up to the proper standards of the time. We have here Martha, who's on the left, her face shadow, leaning forward, passionately arguing with Mary, who's twirling an orange blossom between her fingers and holding a mirror. Now, the mirror in art is symbolizes vanity. And if she wants to be a true disciple of Christ, then Martha's suggesting she's got to give up this vanity, which would mean giving up her mirror. The power of the image lies in Mary's face, caught at the moment, we're told, when her conversion is beginning. Well, I think that Caravaggio is coming over some misteaching here from his cardinal, if that's what he's been asked to portray in this picture. Because the story of Martha and Mary tells us very much the opposite. It's the Martha that needs converting, needs to be converted away from the busyness of life, away from getting close to Jesus. So in many ways, the scene we've got here with Martha and Mary is considering two angles. Martha is clearly upset because she thinks that Mary should be helping her. And I think she's upset not because she wasn't helping, but because she thinks that Mary is sitting with the men who were expected to listen to the rabbi and the prophet and Jesus and important people. That was the thing I think Martha was really getting set up, because she was sitting with the men who were listening to Jesus and not sitting with the women who should be helping her. And we know from the way the Greek terminology in this passage is that, Martha is definitely expecting that Jesus will support her in this task. And obviously, he's not. Martha was upset because Mary was acting like a man. The men expected women at that time to provide the hospitality for visitors, not to be enjoying their company. And that would be true of the culture all through the Mediterranean at this particular time. Men would have thought that women's place was in the kitchen. And let's face it, something like that often resounds in our culture today. But Mary is teaching us something here. And Jesus, in this story, by supporting Mary, is trying to teach us something here that's away from the standards of society in which we bring up, that all men and women are equal before God. And it isn't only that the men can sit down and listen and be the most important parts in the Christian mission. It's the women as well. There's this phrase that comes out of it. She was sitting at his feet. Now that's an idiom, and we spoke about idioms a few weeks ago. And what did that mean? It's not that she was just lying down like a dog, it being the most comfortable seat. The idiom about sitting at someone's feet when a rabbi was round was that the fact you wanted to learn from this rabbi, that you was interested in what he was saying and you wanted to be involved in this teaching, and perhaps even part of being a student of his. Where do we get that from? Well, we certainly get that from the ancient Near East literature, and of course Paul too. Remember, Paul said when he was telling his story of his conversion, that he sat at the feet of Gamaliel, who was a prominent rabbi at the time. He wasn't gazing up adoringly and thinking how wonderful the great rabbi was. He was listening and learning and focusing on the teaching of this master and putting it all together in his mind. And that comes from Acts 22. So that's what's going on here. It's not that she's just lazing around at the feet of Jesus, Mary is actively wanting to be taught by Jesus himself. That's what we learn from this. And the story teaches us very much that discipleship sometimes requires that tasks be suspended while learning is maintained. And Martha obviously doesn't see this. She's still believing that the women shouldn't have such an important role in Jesus's mission as Jesus believed they should. So that's what we need and see in this passage. Now, this is not a passage just for the ladies. It's more, I think, for the men in this world. And it's something we're still struggling to come to terms with, isn't it? And especially within the Christian circles, that men and women are equal in the mission and in the kingdom of God. Even though we still live in a culture that, although changing, still believes that women's work is bringing up children and fixing meals. Men's work is in the fields and in the factories, and they can talk theology in their non-working hours, but the women can't. And so we've got to be thankful for Martha for speaking up and her outposts when Jesus came to her house on this occasion. Her interruption, which wasn't a good manners anyway, she shouldn't have interrupted Jesus with his teaching, surely. But we certainly can learn from that. So the lessons from this story, this lovely short story, there wasn't an urgent need for food, and Jesus had always taught that women, as well as men, were equal partners before God and in the kingdom of God. And that's what we must still remember today, and avoid any suggestion that only certain people are allowed to be active in God's kingdom and making Jesus' name known. That's what we're on about. Now, obviously, we can't overlook too that there would have been a need to provide refreshments for Jesus and his party. There's no two ways about it. Remember, there was no cafes they could pop out to, and Mary, Martha, and Lazarus, as Jesus was visiting their house with all the others, would be expecting and to provide refreshments and food and sleeping accommodation for Jesus and his disciples and the rest of the entourage. I expect that all their neighbours were involved in that as well. It just wasn't Martha doing all the preparation. I'm sure that as Jesus' entourage entered Bethlehem on this thing, although Martha and Mary's house was at the centre of it, the neighbours would have got involved as well. But what a lovely way to understand Jesus' mission in this way. And I don't think Jesus would have ignored Martha completely. I'm sure he always thanked her for all that she did when he visited. So I don't think it's all going one way. So we put up a little slide that tells us there that, Martha was anxious about all sorts of things like we are today. This is not a story that's got no meaning in our time and space. It's still that something else goes on in these days, that Jesus is warning Martha about the problems of busyness. And busyness is a problem for all of us today, isn't it? And the thing is, I think, if we didn't know the punchline of this story, and if we're honest, we'd probably think when we read it that Martha was right, that others, including her sister, should be helping with preparing the food. But there's always time to prepare food. That's what it is. We can't allow also the fact that our busyness prevents us from getting closer to Jesus, spending more time, good time, valuable time, precious time with Jesus. We can't allow work to dictate everything in our lives. I thought I'd show us a video to just point this out very much. I'm sure most of you know the film of Castaway, one of those good Tom Hanks pictures that came out quite a few years ago. There's always, I think, is an interesting scene in this. The way the story get off is Tom Hanks is another person in the story that's always rushing around, doing everything and trying to get everybody to work faster. And this is a scene from the opening of the film when he's in Russia trying to get the Russian branch of FedEx up to speed with processing the parcels quickly. Do you remember that scene if you saw the film? But as he gets on a plane and rushes around, he crashes and he ends up on a desert island for many years before he gets rescued. His busy life comes to a drastic end. It's very interesting as I was just looking at this story to see what the Catholic perspective of this story was, going back to the Caravaggio painting earlier on. And so I did a bit of research that came up with this bit from Catholic. The painting's got nothing to do, but it's got out of the same source. So there's another picture of Jesus be at the home of Martha and Mary, which is completely outside. If you've been to Bethany, even today, the houses are very small. There was no house in Bethany this size, I assure you. But this is another picture from the Renaissance. I'm not sure who painted it. I think it's a well-known painter. But I liked it because you got there huge amounts of food for Jesus and a few friends. Not very realistic, I think, from our story. But of course, there is a culture behind the story, that we've mentioned that women were meant to be in the kitchen and only the men to be teaching. So here we've got a thing that Jesus is teaching the women, I think, who are doing and preparing the meal, and the men are being ignored, not quite what one expects. But one of the Catholic commentators says this: Mary thought that the supreme compliment that she could pay to her divine guest, even more than world-class refreshments, was to give him her full attention. The fullness of truth had come to her home to nourish, enlighten, and transform her. Not to receive and unwrap this wonderful gift would have been an insult to the giver. Martha's mistake was not that she attended to the guest's bodily needs, but the fact that she didn't take up the gift that Jesus was offering her of sitting at his feet, which I think was quite interesting. There's an icon from I think, 5th or 6th centuries, and we see a different picture of what the painter thinks in this icon of what's going on, where Mary is very much the centre of attention and Martha is left out in the cold. But let's finish with a balanced view, I think, of this story that comes from Daniel Block, conservative commentator. Thus, Mary sitting at the feet of Jesus portrays a person willing to learn from him, while Martha's busyness pictures someone serving him. Disciples need to do both. In other words, discipleship is a balanced combination of two things: service and reflection. So, no matter how busy we are, we must all seek and spend time being quiet at Jesus's feet.